name is Brandon Mortensen. I'm the facility manager for the LDS Church here in American Fork, and I manage the property here at the Tabernacle and all the maintenance and upkeep on the building. We're currently wrapping up an exterior restoration on the building where a lot of the sandstone belt that was wrapped around the building when it was built back in 1911 has disintegrated. And so we, in collaboration with another stonemason who's done a lot of work on other church temples and tabernacles and historical buildings, we are just finishing the replacement of all that sandstone and repointing of some brick and some joints. And a part of that project was some internal structural repairs and upgrades up in the attic area so that the building was more structurally sound, and then some insulation upgrades and ductwork upgrades so that the mechanical system works more efficiently in the building. We do have plans in about 7 to 8 years when the roof is due for replacement. We'll do a full seismic upgrade on the building so that it will withstand any future earthquakes that may hit the valley. So we just hope that doesn't happen for another 7 years. So that's the plans that the FM group and the church has in place for this building over the next 10 years. We try our best to stick with the historical period of when the building was built. Next year we do have in the plans that we are replacing all the upholstery on the pews, as well as the opera seating, which is some members refer to it as the choir seating, but the opera seating will be replaced as a whole with new seating that is built to look more of a historical appearance from more of the early 1900s. And so the upholstery will be new, padding will be new in the whole assembly hall, as well as the chapel downstairs. So as we've done that, we viewed it from a different perspective as we do a regular meeting house. For a regular church house, we have 3 standard fabric colors we work off of. For this type of building, the historical group up in Salt Lake will be picking out a specific fabric that will kind of fit that era a little bit better.
My name is Jay Taggart. I'm an architect for Curtis Minor Architecture. I've been an architect for 14 years. I'm not an architectural historian, but the architectural style that this most closely resembles is the colonial revival, which is prominent with the Doric, classical Doric columns and the recessed portico. This religious architecture is a prominent landmark in Main Street, American Fork. The exterior is built with stone, red sandstone, and yellow brick, and does not feature a tower or a steeple. The building functions as a meeting place for a large gathering of members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the northern Utah County for worship services. The building is part of the American Fork Historic District, listed in the National Register of Historic Places. The interior seats about 2,000 and retains much of the original decoration. The cantilevered balcony is a structural wonder. Like many LDS tabernacles, it houses a grand pipe organ. It also is built with a baptismal font. The tabernacle was extensively remodeled in 1962 and rededicated by Henry D. Moyle. It was remodeled again in 1982 and continues to function as a tabernacle and hold various civic meetings. The tin up here, the different patterns you have. So over here you've got the coffered ceiling, which is made of tin, and then it also comes over and you get some of this crown work that gives that ceiling some relief. You have such a large ceiling, and all the different textures and different patterns give it a nice means to break up that space and get more define it, make it a nicer space for the people who are occupying the space. And then over here you start to get some more of different patterns of different natural patterns, such as leaves and a few things of looks like it might be wheat and finials and things like that. And then it continues over to have the termination of the crown against the wall. The cantilevered balcony is unique in that it's freestanding and it doesn't have any structural support that is visible, such as columns. And it's actually a structural wonder in the sense that, you know, this building was built back in the early 1900s, and for the most part, this is most likely used with wood construction. And so to span something that far and not have any support of that is something that's a wonder and amazement. So architecture back in the 1900s, if you look on the exterior and you see stone and you see brick, that's what the wall is. That's the structure of that wall, is that stone that you see, and that brick is structural brick. It doesn't have another interior framing of wood or some other structural member that's carrying that load, is how buildings would have been built back in the 1900s. It's nice that buildings such as these that are religious architecture features are still standing, and that 100 years later we're still recognizing them for the monument and the landmark that they are in the community.
My name is Crosby Meekum. I grew up in American Fork. I was born less than 1,000 feet from here, and I grew up less than 3,000 feet from here. Professionally, I was a mechanical engineer, practicing mostly in construction and contract management. When I was about 11 or 12 years old, American Fork was divided from 4 wards to 8 wards. And at that time they had 4 meeting houses in American Fork plus the Tabernacle. Now I don't know where some of the other newly formed wards had their meetings, but the American Fork 5th Ward used the Tabernacle as a meeting house. And in the basement, in the lower floor, there was at that time a stage and a dance floor with a spring floor. And on occasion, when we would have our sacrament meeting in the lower floor, I was a deacon and had occasion to walk across this noisy wooden floor to pass the sacrament. And in those days, well, we put taps on our shoes to make them last longer, and it was noisy. But that's a little bit about my experience with the Tabernacle when American Fork was young. At that time, the Tabernacle would have been about 40 years old. Now it's 100 years old. I was asked to look at the photograph of the structure of the Tabernacle as it was being built, and trying to get an idea about how they managed the structural composition to support this huge space without columns, with the resources that were available in the early 1900s, late 1800s. One of the particular structural problems is to support the balcony that's behind me. And I did observe that there are 4 main structural bents in the frame structure for the Tabernacle. And you can see where each of those main structural bents are located in the walls of the Tabernacle, because between the windows there's a wider space where the structural bent or frame, that particular frame is, as compared with between other pairs of windows. That's where the bents are that provide the overarching structure for this nice, huge space. But then the balcony is quite a little bit of a problem, because without columns, how is it supported, stuck out over the other seats as it is in the back? And I believe that between the 2 columns, these 2 columns of that bent, there is a beam that goes all the way across that supports the, you might say, the face or the very front of the balcony. And then behind that there are structures that go back from that bent to the north wall, which is supported in part by a wall that divides the north lobby area from the main seating area. Since 1949, when I was a deacon, until now, I don't know how many renovations the Tabernacle has gone through, But I believe that I remember that where the scroll work in the ceiling of the tabernacle, which we can see there, is now a solid ivory or almond color. As I remember it, all of that scroll work was individually painted. Somebody was up there on their back like Da Vinci or somebody painting individually the scroll work of the ceiling of the tabernacle. About 15 years ago, I was involved a little bit in one of the remodels of the tabernacle where the spring floor, dance floor, and stage area was remodeled altogether into a family history center. And I, at a time when family history was just emerging, the wisdom of those who thought to invest in that at the time, I thought was just wonderful.
And so this building, this tabernacle, has served not just in a spiritual sense to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but it's served the entire community as a whole. Well, the tabernacle has been an important part of our town, of American Fork City. In the early stages of the building, and even as in recent years, we've had police officers that were honored here. We had a member of the band community that had a funeral here. We had a fallen soldier, Sergeant Nathan Barnes, that had a funeral service here, and it's big enough for the entire community to show the support. And if you could picture flags that began here in the tabernacle and lined the streets to the cemetery for Sergeant Nathan Barnes, it was a special time for our city to be able to pay tribute to him and to honor him and to just show a collective support of a community to a family. And the tabernacle was that place. It just was the right place for us as a city to gather. Even recently, our governor used this venue, the tabernacle, to pay tribute to the fallen soldiers of our town from the early history of our country. And he paid tribute to them and honored them, along with all those men and women who put their life on the line, and especially those who gave the ultimate sacrifice. In that very same meeting, we had the opportunity to honor Sergeant Corey Ride as a community. And so this tabernacle is a special place for us as a community. We pass by it, we drive by it, and occasionally we have the privilege of entering it and taking part into special things.
My name is Betty Gaisford Spencer. I'm 89. I've lived in American Fork my whole life. When they divided Alpine steak and created the American Fork steak, that was such a big occasion. That was in May of 1963, and Dr. Hormer F. Royal was president of Alpine Steak, and he had recently replaced Fieldy Jensen, who was called as a mission president to Scotland. But it was fascinating to see the general authorities. There were two authorities here that day, and as they divided the steak and created the new American Fork steak, it was very exciting for us to know that our steaks had grown and that we now had two steaks in American Fork. It's amazing now how many more we have. But at that time, in 1963, when President Stanley D. Roberts was named the first president of the American Fork steak, that was a really emotional, and it was a very, I think it was a thrilling day to realize that the population of the steak had grown so much that we had two steaks in American Fork. I think the best thing that happened to us as a general population in the church was the opportunity we had every quarter to hear one of the general authorities. And at that time we got messages from our stake people, our stake president and his counselors, and the people whom they chose to speak. But they inspired us and they directed us and they blessed us with the knowledge of the gospel and how we could make the gospel a part of our lives. I never think of the Tabernacle as an empty building. I always feel like the Lord has a message that He wants us to hear, and I can think of no better place than this beloved Tabernacle to hear that word.
Hi, my name's Curtis Hadlock. I am 55 years old. I grew up here in American Fork. I was born in February 5, 1959. I grew up basically 3 blocks to the west of us here of the Tabernacle. The Tabernacle has always played a big role in my life as a kid. Thinking about the 100-year anniversary, I'm 55 and I've basically been here over half the life of the Tabernacle. As a young man, before my mission, I was a part of mission prep in this building. The stake president at the time was Neil Savage. He was the president that gave me the interview prior to my going on the mission. But in the northeast part of the parking lot was known as the tithing house. It was a small building, looked like a little house that was there that was used at our time for classrooms, and I believe the stake president's office was in there. And I remember meeting with him on a couple occasions prior to my mission. But also in that building is where I had mission prep class, where I was able to go and to prepare for my mission. But I'm grateful for this building. I'm grateful for the gospel and for the experiences I've had here. And I've seen apostles in this building. One that sticks out is Elder Packard came a few years ago. It's been several years. I can't even tell you how many years ago it was, but he came, and I was able to be a part of that and to be able to meet him. So with that, I say thank you for many memories and experiences that I've had over my lifetime here in this wonderful building.
Hey, my name is Farrah Robbins.
I'm Richard Robbins. Well, the first time I came in the Tabernacle, I was in the stake presidency as executive secretary and was helping to get it set up. And I thought, this looks like a mini Salt Lake City Tabernacle. And I sang in the Tabernacle choir there, so it was kind of like a homecoming. We have a genealogical library that's open free to anybody who wants to go down and use it. And we have people to instruct them and give them guidance in what they do down there. So it's a very wonderful place for them.
It's beautiful. And to preserve this, I'm so glad that they haven't torn it down. It makes American Fork special.
Well, we're Ralph and Jerry Pratt. We were both born and raised in American Fork, lived here all our lives. My grandfather was a custodian of this building when I was real young, 9 or 10. And so I have some memories that he allowed me to have. And one of them was the building used to have a coal-fired furnace. And it was down in the basement. I don't know if it's there now or not, but I remember as kids we would put the clinkers and the ashes in buckets, and then we'd haul them upstairs, a flight of stairs, and dump them outside to be picked up later. And one good memory was he let me go in the organ room. It's right behind here, and it's where all the organ valves and things are. Pipes. And someone was playing the organ, and I went inside there, and all these valves were functioning and noisy. For a 10-year-old kid, that was kind of a scary, but noisy experience, but it was a great experience. My grandfather's funeral was held in this building, and Elder David O. McKay came down and spoke at his funeral. I remember coming here for state conferences, and as kids want to do, the first thing we did was run to get the balcony seats. We always wanted to be up there in the balcony. Downstairs, where the Family History Center is now, that's where the baptismal font was when we were baptized. And where the center is now, there was a dance floor there, and there was a stage on the north end of the building there in that room. And they had plays there, and they had dances, and it was kind of a recreational type place.
They used to have all wood seats, and my little friend that lived in our neighborhood's uncle he did the building after his grandfather, and we'd come and dust the benches and help him that way. It was kind of fun, and that's where I really met Ralph, was here at conference. After conference, just a group of us went over to my friend's house, and I'd never seen him before. I never thought I'd ever marry anybody from American Fork.
She was partial to Pleasant Grove kids.
My name is Michael Loveridge, and I served here previously as a stake president. I have two vivid memories of here in the Tabernacle. One was, I had a brother-in-law who was a non-member, married my sister-in-law, and we invited him to come to conference. He had no idea what conference was about, what we did here, except that it was a religious gathering. So we invited him and his wife to come. They sat with my wife. And that weekend, Elder Irene was our visiting general authority, member of the Quorum of 12 Apostles. And during his talk, which was the final talk of the session, he turned to the left of the congregation and looked out into the audience and seemed to look right directly towards my brother-in-law and changed his message for just a brief moment. And Elder Irene, who's a very intelligent man, spoke in a very humble, personal, direct way to that direction, which happened to be my brother-in-law. Anyway, afterwards, as we met as a stake presidency to discuss the conference, he asked President Merkley, who then I was serving as first counselor to, was there any non-members in the Tabernacle today? And President Merkley says, not that I'm aware of. And I knew there was one. And it really was the turning point in Dan's life. He was an apostle of the Lord who was very sensitive to the needs of those that have come, and the Spirit directed him to voice and to speak to an individual who he knew not, and yet it was a turning point in Dan's life. Later became a member of the church, and now is a very active member of the church, and enjoying blessings in the kingdom of God here upon the earth. So we're grateful to Elder Irene for that experience. I also recall one time as serving as a stake president, I came prepared with my talk, and I just didn't feel comfortable as I sat on the stand as others were speaking and music was being sung. The thought came to mind is to think of all the miracles that had taken place from last stake conference to this stake conference. And so I took out my pad of paper and a pen and began to write down all the miracles that had taken place within this stake. And I couldn't write fast enough. And so when I got up to speak, I spoke about different individuals who were in attendance and miracles that I had witnessed or been a part of or knew about that had taken place here within the American Fork, Utah stake. And so we were really a blessed stake and had a lot of wonderful members of the stake. Tabernacles were built together, people together. This is a historic building. So, you know, it's 100 years old, and a lot of wonderful people have come through and spoken here. There's a spirit about this building that are not found in other buildings. And so it's a time on the weekends where the saints can gather and be taught, instructed, edified, share their testimonies. It's a place of music. We've had different music groups attend here and participate. Social gatherings that certainly have taken place here. Baptisms, there's a font below here. I've thought back of all the people that have spoken at this podium, and there have been some great individuals. I think back at the President Merkley, who I served as counselor to here, and then preceded him as a stake president. I've heard him give some powerful sermons, and I've heard some powerful sermons from other individuals. Some great men and sisters that have spoken here, and great things have been taught here. We've all left here edified, been grateful that we've been here. and it's just a place of refuge for the saints.
My name is Craig Terry. I'm from American Fork. I live in American Fork now and actually was born and raised in American Fork. I'm presently serving as an Area 70 here in the Utah South area. I have a lot of sweet and sacred memories of this sacred edifice. Having been born in American Fork, I have sweet memories of coming on many occasions to attend state conference with my parents and my two brothers as state conferences were held here. When I was growing up, I lived in the old 4th Ward here in American Fork, attending the old 4th Ward building. It was located up on 300 North between, I think, 4th and 5th East. That structure has since, sadly, it was burned down, and so a new building sits on that site now, but I just have, and that was all part of the then the Alpine Stake, thus the name of the Tabernacle, the Alpine Stake Tabernacle. But wonderful memories of coming here. One particular state conference that's very memorable to me. Of the 9 years that I served as stake president, there was only one time that we had an apostle assigned to come and preside at state conference. And one year we had Elder Dallin H. Oaks come and preside. And I just remember how thrilled we were and how thrilled the members of the stake were to have Elder Oaks be assigned to come in and preside at the conference. And I recall that we had a meeting on Sunday morning. We had, before the conference began, we had a gathering down in the basement of the Tabernacle, a short meeting before the conference began. But then with about, at least there's a half hour before conference was scheduled to begin, Elder Oaks just said he wanted to come up and go out and be among the saints. And it was such a sacred experience to witness Elder Oaks as an apostle and a special witness of our Savior as he came up the stairs and then just started to go out and meet and visit with the saints. It brought to mind seeing the reaction of the members. I could just envision even being, as he was serving as a special witness of the Savior, and seeing so many of the families, even from already the tabernacle was packed at that time. People would come early to make sure they'd get a seat here and not have to go to the overflow in the stake center. But seeing the families send their children up from where they were seated just so that their children would have the blessing of shaking hands with an apostle of the Lord Jesus Christ. And what was so memorable and tender was just the great love, the sincere, pure love of Christ that Elder Oaks showed as he would even kneel down and talk to these little ones and shake their hands and just feel the love of the Savior flowing through him for the little ones, certainly, as well as the youth, the young adults, and the more senior members of our stake that he would visit with, and just walking up and down the aisles and just lovingly and tenderly visiting with the saints. That is a sacred memory that I will always cherish, and then the privilege to hear him teach and testify as we were gathered together. But I'm so grateful that over the years that the leaders of the church, the brethren, have made the decision to maintain this tabernacle.
My name is Shirley Allen, and it's a pleasure to be here because the American Fork Tabernacle has been a real part of my life. I only live 1 block west of here, and I have done most of my life, and so I pass it almost every day and see the things on it that way. But today I'd like to tell you about a special day for our family and for the stake that was here. The meeting started at 10 o'clock, and it was a capacity crowd in the tabernacle here. And President Phil D. Jensen, who was president of the stake at that time, conducted the meeting. And the congregation sang, "Come, come, ye saints," and then the former president of the Alpine stake, Edward W. Burgess, gave the invocation. And then they had a combined choir, and that combined choir sang a song about the Redeemer. And then, following that song, Elder Hunter got up and was presiding. He said that President Jensen, Phil D. Jensen, had been released, and that he called for a vote of thanks to President Jensen and all of the officers that had been part of the Alpine stake. Then he proceeded to say that the stake would be divided, and there would be an Alpine stake and an American Fork stake. Then he turned the time over to Brother Critchlow, and Brother Critchlow got up and said who was going to be the new officers of the Alpine stake. And that time it was to be Homer Royal was to be, and his first counselor was Leland Pridey, and his second counselor was Reed Burgess from Alpine. And they were then sustained by the congregation for that period of time. Then he gave the ones that were to be in the American Fork stake, and the first name he read off was my father, who was to be the patriarch of the American Fork stake. Then he talked about Stanley Roberts, who was the new stake president. Fred Bowen was the first counselor, and DeMont Coombs was the second counselor. Each one of the people that were called talked in the conference, and at the conclusion they had a song, and Delbert Chipman, who was formerly in the state presidency of the Alpine State, gave the benediction. Then we, excuse me, then we came up to this room. This room is the east part of the tabernacle on the of where the pipes are. And this was the room that we had where the President Hunter and those who were invited was to ordain my father and to have them sustained by those that are there. All of the members of my family was there. My sister, my brother-in-law, their children, these kind of things. So it was a special occasion that we had in this room. I think that each of us have had our patriarchal blessing, know how important they are to each of us. My father had the opportunity to give 876 of them for a period of time. And it was a real special time in this room for that to happen.
I'm Jesse Richard Adamson. We now live in Highland, Utah. That's where we've resided for many years, but I grew up in American Fork, Utah. As far as civic involvement, I did serve as mayor for 8 years in Highland. You know, I grew up in American Fork, and so the Tabernacle's always been here. I often wondered why it was called the Alpine Tabernacle and it was in American Fork. Well, come to find out, I realized that this Alpine Tabernacle was built when the Alpine stake was divided from the Provo stake, and all of North Utah County came to this tabernacle as their religious tabernacle they're building here. And so I did the same thing growing up here. I was actually baptized here in this building in 1961, as well as everyone else in town, because none of the stake centers had been built at that time, so there's no other baptismal fonts. And we used to gather here 4 times a year for stake conference. And I remember coming here and getting here early so we could get up in the balcony and have seats in the balcony, and I really enjoyed that. Through my life, I've been here time and time again. I graduated from high school in this building and from seminary, and I've been here on many other occasions, both religious and civic, and enjoyed this wonderful edifice. I can share one cute story. I think I was 5 or 6 years old, and we just left from stake conference to go home, and I was on the north steps here behind me, and my parents had left me. And I was upset. I was both sad and mad because they'd left me, and I had 6 brothers and sisters, so it wasn't hard to have one left behind. But I still remember my neighbors coming up and saying that, "Here, we'll take you home." And I said, "No, they left me. They've got to come back and get me." So I often think about that, sitting on the steps there as a young boy, being all alone, sad and mad at the same time. I look back with fondness on that, and I remember how deliberate I was that I was not going. I only lived 5 blocks away. I wasn't going to walk, and I wasn't going to ride home with anybody else. They left me. They had to come back and get me. One particular time that I remember being here is with Elder Haight, and not long before he passed on, and as he instructed us in not only a leadership capacity, but also over the pulpit of stake conference, the wonderful testimony that he bore of his Lord and Savior Jesus Christ and the experiences they had that brought him to that knowledge. And there's been many other experiences like that, as you come here, you can't help but remember things that went on here in the tabernacle. I remember even as a young man counting the tiles in the ceiling, and I probably should have been paying more attention to the speakers at that point, but I passed time by counting, and so one of these days you'll have to count those and see how many they are. So, I think you'll find out as you talk to people that this is an important part of all of our lives, and we're glad it's still here.
So my name is Sister Love. I'm from Yuba City, California. So some of my favorite memories in the Tabernacle is going to the Family History Center and to be able to do online proselyting. So we can do proselyting over Facebook now. And I've been able to teach a girl in Germany and just answer a little bit of her questions. And so it's amazing to be able to come to a building that is so functional and to be able to teach all around the world. I would say that the history of the Tabernacle definitely makes it mean more. It is so cool to be able to think about it's 100 years old. There's been so many people who have come here and who have sang and who have taught and who have, been baptized. And it's amazing to think about all of that, all of the Lord's work being done in one building over that much amount of time. It is amazing. So I feel that the purpose of the Tabernacle is to be able to have the saints gather together and to be able to be taught and to worship their God together. The temple is a sacred place, and it is a place where you have to be worthy to go to. And the Tabernacle is also a very sacred place, but it's open to the more general public. So we can bring our friends here and we can all worship together and kind of show them what we believe. So in the Book of Mormon, in the Book of Alma, it gives a commandment which says that we're commanded to gather together often in fasting and in prayer. And it's a place that we can all, as a group, get together and hear the same message. And when we get to hear the same message, we can all apply it.
But I'm Sister Andolin. I'm from Missouri. So one of my favorite memories in the Tabernacle was one of my first weeks in this area, and we had a baptism that happened in the basement of the Tabernacle. And we got to come early and fill up the font, and I just sort of studied in the chapel down there while waiting for it to fill up and for people to come. And it was just beautiful down there and neat to be down there and to feel the spirit of just the building as well, with it being sacred, because baptism is so important and so sacred of an ordinance. And so to have a beautiful place, and that was something that the people who were being baptized specifically requested to be done in this building, that they're like, please, can we have it in this building? A tabernacle means to me a place that we can gather together to worship, that's set apart for a little bit different than a normal church building where we have a lot of different activities, but purely more for worshiping God.
Richard and
Betty Lou
Merkley. And we're both from American Fork, born and reared in American Fork, she was. And I'm a transplant from Idaho, but been here since I was 10 years old, so American Fork is my home. And so we both have a common memory, although at the time we probably didn't even know that each other was in the Tabernacle.
That's true.
And that was?
Well, growing up in American Fork, I remember state conferences, and one of the most memorable state conferences for me was as a teenager coming, and President Joseph Fielding Smith was here with his wife, Jessie Evans Smith. And they were a sweet, sweet couple. She was his third wife, and she sang, I think it's called The King's Glory, but we all knew it as He That Hath Clean Hands and a Pure Heart. And he played the piano while she sang. And it was just a very memorable experience that many of us that grew up at that time have talked about since.
Everybody knew that Joseph Fielding Smith was kind of a stern member of the 12, and you know, that really illusion was erased, because when we saw him playing the piano, and he even cracked a few jokes that day, and the two of them, like Sister Merkley said, they were just sweet together, and you could tell that they were very much in love, and that sternness that we saw manifest at General Conference just wasn't here in the Tabernacle. He was sweet and kind and humorous, and it was a great experience to see that he was a real human being and had tender feelings. So that was a great experience. Originally, the downstairs was a large cultural hall in the north end of the Tabernacle, and they built a spring maple floor for dancing. And so we had the Saturday night dance every weekend. Mm-hmm. And May 11th, 1963, I wanted to dance with her, but I was kind of bashful. And so my best friend took me by the arm and walked me over to where she was standing with the rest of the girls, and put my hand in hers, and he commanded us to dance. And so we went out on the dance floor, and I discovered that once I'd held her hand, I really didn't want to let go. And so, and what was more unfathomable is that she didn't want to let go of my hand either. So we held hands for 2 years through high school, 2 years of college, with a mission wedged in between high school and college, and we're married almost to the very date, 6 years later. Mm-hmm. We wanted to be married on May 11th. That was our anniversary when we started our, I guess, closer than friendship. And we were married on May 9th, 1969. We would have been married on the 11th, but that fell on a Sunday, and the temple wasn't open that day. So that's our story about the Tabernacle. I know that this Tabernacle cost about $81,000 to complete. And I don't know what part of that $81,000 went towards the dance floor, but it was worth it to me. I think about the people that went before us. The night we had the dedication in 1996, we had several former stake presidents here. President Stanley Roberts, President Phil D. Jensen, President Homer Royal, he was president of the Provo Temple.
President Pridey.
Leland F. Pridey, and other men that had served as high counselors when we were young. And I wish we had their image and their voices recorded like you're doing here with people who have been associated with this building for such a long time. It'll mean a lot to young Feraldine in years to come, and to others who will look in and say, yeah, I remember those people.
I'm David Chamberlain. I'm an American Fork resident since 1985, and I came here to work with the M.L. Bigelow and Company, pipe organ builders, where I hold the title of Vice President and Tonal Director. That means I design and control the sound of the organs that we build. The organ in the Alpine Tabernacle was built in 1923 by the Austin Organ Company of Hartford, Connecticut. At that time, the Austin Company was one of the, if not the, preeminent builder of pipe organs in America. I have in the file from the Austin Company letters from John J. McClellan, who was a tabernacle organist in that era. Interesting how he argues very strongly in favor of the Austin Company building this organ rather than the other company that was under consideration at the time. Unfortunately, in 1975 or thereabouts, the organ was vandalized, and the vandals fortunately thought this was the organ, only the console, and so the console was destroyed. The sound-producing parts of the organ remained intact. Only a few dents in the facade pipes of the organ were suffered as a result of that. At about that time, and I think also now that I've perused the files, there had been some changes to the some of the sets of pipes in the organ, so that the sound by 1975 was no longer exactly the way it had been in 1923. And what we have today is sort of an odd combination of what's left of 1923 and various attempts to modernize the organ since that time. But what's really unique and special about the organ is something that the Austin Company had pioneered and patented on their own. And that's called the universal air chest. Most pipe organs have a relatively thin table of pressurized air on which all the pipes stand and various mechanisms inside to admit air into pipes. The Austin Company had the ingenious idea to make what they call the universal air chest, which was a large room full of air so that a technician could actually walk inside the organ as it was winded up, that means pressure in the chamber, and observe all of the actions inside the chest, which otherwise, certainly in those days, could not have been done. So it's a fascinating experience to walk into this pressurized chamber and see all the moving parts that are controlling the airflow to the pipes. That's still preserved here, and there are fewer and fewer Austin organs of this vintage still in existence. So what's special to me as an organist and an organ builder is we have a real treasure here in a, if not original, a very restorable piece of musical instrument from that era, very, very period. And it still speaks with a voice completely different to my ears from any of the organs that have been built since then in our area. So that's a special thing. How many pipes are inside the organ? I didn't do my homework, but there are 19 ranks, and if we do quick math, knowing that there's 61 notes, actually on this organ there's an extra octave of pipes at the top, allowing higher pitches to be sounded through couplers, which organists would know what I'm talking about. There are 73 pipes per stop, and there are 19 stops, 19 ranks, but some of those are pedal ranks. Well, all right, so quick math, 20 times, there's roughly 1,200 pipes in the organ, ranging from the largest one, 16 foot long, big enough for a man to stand inside, made of wood, and the smallest ones making the sound like a dog whistle and smaller than the average, well, about the size of a pencil. When this organ was built in 1923, electricity was already well established, and the contract called for an electric blower It specifies the voltage and beyond that, and I believe the original blower is still in use downstairs. That is a three-phase motor. The turbine that would pump the air into the organ, I believe, is original. I am sure that John J. McClellan, who was so instrumental in persuading the authorities that this was the organ to get, I don't have it documented, but I'd be very surprised if he did not come and personally play the organ, very likely in a dedication recital. John J. McClellan wrote the music to Sweet Is the Work, of one of my favorite hymn, and he was a tabernacle organist from the early 1900s into the 20s, I believe. American Fork resident Parley Belknap, professor of organ at BYU, who was my teacher when I studied there, worked together with the Austin Company and their representatives to develop a console with provisions for additional stops to be added to bring the organ more into conformity with the expectations of organ sound at that time. And so organists that haven't looked inside the organ or know the whole story are sometimes frustrated because here are all these stops and only half of them work. Well, that's because only half of them are connected to pipes. The other half are like that extra light switch in your home that is for the fixture over the mantle that someday will get installed. So there's a bunch of stops here that don't have any sound producing pipes connected to them. So everything in the organ works, but not everything at the console is connected to anything in the organ. If I had my druthers, I'd love to see the organ faithfully restored and let us hear what it really sounded like in 1923. I think that would be so cool.
The reason this building is so important in my life is because as a young member of the American Fork 4th Ward primary, our building had a fire which required us to attend church. This became our chapel. And just to the east of this building in the parking lot was the tithing office that was still standing at that time. That became the primary rooms. And Sister Catherine Beck taught me primary in the tithing office, and that I was baptized here. So this was an important building at that point in my life. I always remember when we'd come to stake conference here, my baptism was here, and little did I realize that as I progressed through life that this building would be a major part of my life. I, as a teenager, would attend the stake dances that were here. Lehigh would have a stake dance, PG would have a stake dance, American Fork would have a stake dance, which was held downstairs. And so there were bands that played here. 4 Bits Plus Tax was one of the best bands in the county. So there were lots of dances held here, lots of associations. And later on, when I moved, after my college experience, moved to American Fork, I became a member of the American Fork 5th Ward. That ward was divided along with some other wards in the American Fork stake to make the American Fork 17th Ward and the American Fork 18th Ward. And the American Fork 18th Ward used this building then for their chapel, and I was a member of that bishopric. And so I would attend here with my family, and this building became our chapel. This building was important to me all of my life because my father was very proud of the American Fork Tabernacle. He told me the hands that built this building were the hands of pioneers, literal pioneers. And those children of those pioneers that had come here to work and to make a living. And he was very honored to be able to have this building in our community. So I have a great deal of memories of sitting in the balcony and attending state conference and listening to many of the general authorities and dignitaries that would visit here. Having been a member of the American Fork 18th Ward Bishopric, and this building meant so much to me for many reasons prior to that opportunity. But as a member of that 18th Ward Bishopric, there were many members who just had a difficult time coming here because of age and infirmities in their life, and one of which was Ozzie Nelson. Ozzie Nelson was a longtime scouter in this area. In fact, I still believe they have an Ozzie Nelson Award that they give out in scouting in this area. And Ozzie Nelson would come to this ward, and he had cut out the top of his shoes because his feet were in such bad condition. And so, you know, he would come up these stairs, and one day, one Sabbath morning, as he was coming up the stairs, and I was standing by the doors on the west of this building, as he was walking up and to the chapel area here, what we called the chapel area, the main area of the tabernacle, I paused for just a moment and asked Ozzie and told Ozzie, I said, Ozzie, you know, this is difficult for you. You almost have to crawl up those stairs to get here, to come to church, and it's not needed. It's not necessary. I says, we can bring the sacrament to your home. We can make arrangements. Ozzie's wife had passed away, and he just lived by himself, and he says, well, Brother Barrett, that may be fine for you, but for me, he says, the fact that the Lord would hang on the cross for me, I can at least climb the steps of my church and come and attend and partake of the sacrament here. And that meant a great deal to me. I was a relatively young man at the time, and I thought about that, and I thought about my testimony, and I thought, would I be an Ozzie Nelson? You know, would I do everything in my power to make sure that I was found where I needed to be on the Sabbath day to partake of the Lord's Supper? So this building means a great deal to me because of that. It didn't have a bishop's office. We had to, you know, make our own bishop's office downstairs. We had to just make classrooms do for all of our Sunday school classes. So I have a great deal of love for this building, a great deal. It means a lot to me.
My name is Alan Clare Christensen. I am the patriarch of the American Fork, Utah stake, and have been that for 4.5 years. I grew up in American Fork. When I was 22, I went away to graduate school in California. But this building has featured prominently in my own life's history as well as in my family's. For example, the funerals of both of my Christensen grandparents were held here in 1940 and 1941. I was baptized in this building on May 16th. 1943. World War II was on, gasoline was rationed. I had to walk 5 blocks with my dad to come to the Tabernacle on a Sunday afternoon. I gave my first stake conference talk in this building as a 13-year-old deacon in April of 1948. The visiting authority was the presiding bishop of the church, Bishop LeGrand Richards. He'd asked for a deacon to speak on 5 reasons why a boy should pray. My father wrote the talk. They were good reasons, I remember that. But he came home on Saturday evening saying the presiding bishop had asked for that, and President Jesse M. Walker had asked that I assume the responsibility. I was frightened to death, and my father said, don't worry, I'll write your talk. What I didn't know was 31.5 years later, living in Southern California, this same general authority, now a senior member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, would call me to be the first president of the Chino, California stake. As a 9-year-old, however, I was in a stake conference in this building, sitting in the middle section, down close to the front, when my mother whispered in my ear, that is the new apostle. And it was Elder Marky Peterson, who was tall and slender and dark-haired. On the 25th of January 1970, in Southern California, he ordained me to be a bishop in the church. I had no idea that those kinds of things were going to happen. I graduated from seminary in this building in May of 1952. And a year later, in May of 1953, I graduated from high school, the American Fork High School in this building. And I suppose, importantly, on the 10th of October, 1954, I was ordained an elder in the auditorium of the Tabernacle by my father. And then even more importantly than that, in January of 1958, I met a young lady on the west sidewalk, and we were married in December 19th, 1958, and for the last 55 plus years, she's been Mrs. Allen Christensen. Previous to that, she was Kathleen Ruth Atwater. And I was sustained to be a patriarch in this building. And the last stake conference address that I've been invited to give was given in this building as well in June of 2012. So there have been a lot of things in this building that have been precious to me. I sang in the Alpine Stake Men's Chorus before I went away to graduate school. And so I've come home after an absence. I came home in September of 2001 after an absence fundamentally of 44 years, except we were here off and on for special events like President Henry D. Moyle's rededication of this building. One of the magnificent things when I was a boy through into my young adulthood were the Christmas pageants, and they were spectacular. There were things that were just wonderful. My father was one of the wise men, and they built a stage over the choir seats. There were choir benches in those days, and one year they decided they would do something different. They thought they would add an additional air of authenticity, and so they arranged for the young woman who was portraying the part of Mary to ride a donkey through the east door of the Tabernacle. That was a one-time only innovation because the donkey had not been schooled in the social graces, and so they didn't continue that. But it's been a community center. The church has been very generous in how it's been used. The people in the community have appreciated how it's been used. The organ in this building is a magnificent musical contribution. There's nothing else of a comparable quality in this whole county, insofar as I know. And we've had some wonderful people play it and some wonderful musicians here. Great people have come through this building, young and old, and now it's 100 years old. And the sacrifices that went in to build it were rather remarkable. You look at it from a dollar standpoint now, it doesn't seem so very much. But if you adjust it for the cost of living index and one thing and another, and the fact that they didn't factor in the volunteer labor, the cost was substantial. And the 4 wards in the American Fork bore half of that cost, because they were to have the building, and Lehigh and Pleasant Grove had already begun tabernacles of their own, and so the initial Alpine stake reached from Linden on the east-south to Cedar Valley on the northwest, and the first stake presidency served 27.5 years, and were a marvelous group of men, and they were succeeded by another man who was marvelous, Clifford E. Young, who became a general authority, and so on. So the history of this building and the people who have passed through it are rather interesting. And one of the assignments that they have given me in connection with the centennial is to write a manuscript history of this building, which is essentially done. Beginning with Joseph F. Smith, every president of the church has spoken here either as the president or an apostle. David O. McKay is the only one here who spoke as the president of the church, but Heber J. Grant spoke here as an apostle. George Albert Smith spoke here as an apostle. In fact, I was introduced to him as a little boy, and he asked me, "What is your Sunday go-to-meeting name?" And I stopped and thought for a second, and so I gave my full name, Alan Clare Christensen. And he smiled and he said, that's good. And he was succeeded, of course, by David O. McKay, who subsequently presided and spoke at the funeral of Clifford E. Young in this building. President McKay was succeeded by Joseph Fielding Smith, who spoke here a number of occasions, and was very close to one of the subsequent stake presidents, Phil D. Jensen. And he spoke here several times as an apostle. He was succeeded by Harold B. Lee, who reorganized the stake presidency and called Phil D. Jensen to be the stake president, and spoke here on other occasions. And I heard President Kimball speak as an apostle here in the 40s. And he was succeeded by Ezra Taft Benson, who I heard as a young Star Scout of 13 speak about his experiences in war-torn Europe when he went there to essentially administer relief from the church and to reestablish the church. And he was succeeded by Howard W. Hunter, who called and divided the stake into the Alpine stake and the American Fork, Utah stake. And he was succeeded by Gordon B. Hinckley, who spoke here as an apostle. And one of his early calls as an apostle in this building was to Thomas S. Monson to choose a new stake patriarch to replace Myron R. Moyle, who had died, and their stake, the Alpine stake, had gone without a little better than a year without a patriarch. So I can't go beyond Thomas S. Monson because there hasn't been a president yet beyond Thomas S. Monson. So essentially, what does that amount to? Beginning with Joseph F. Smith, Heber J. Grant, George Albert Smith, David O. McKay, Joseph Fielding Smith, Harold B. Lee, Spencer W. Kimball, Ezra Taft Benson, Gordon B. Hinckley, and Thomas S. Monson. That's 10 of the men who served as presidents of the church have spoken here. When Elder Ezra Taft Benson came, he spoke about the experiences of administering relief, food, and clothing to starving Latter-day Saints. And I can still remember sitting close to the front, and the front row was just, all young children were sitting on the front row of the Tabernacle. And he noted as he spoke that the children were swinging their legs back and forth as they sat on the benches. And he said, when he went to Europe and sat in the meetings, the little children did not swing their legs back and forth. He said it's not that they were more reverent than the children in the Alpine stake. He said they had not had enough to eat. They didn't have strength to swing their legs back and forth. So, yeah, there's been wonderful things here, but it's been a continuum. We just don't live in an instant. Things that happen one day maybe influence something that's much longer.